It's a joy to be with you on this Tuesday. And as I mentioned yesterday, we're right in the middle of our Bible school. Actually started yesterday and we're going through the entire week. Each morning is fully dedicated to reaching children, reaching adults with the gospel, and it's just exciting to serve the Lord. Today I'd like to follow up on what we talked about yesterday from 1 Corinthians chapter 9 in Hebrews chapter 12. Here we have a strong admonition to be like the men and women of old who walked by faith, who were willing to believe God even in the midst of trial and tribulation. They looked unto Jesus, the author and finisher of their faith, and as God dealt with them, they understood that the chastening of the Lord was for their benefit. Tremendous chapters there. But then we have the warning in verse 15, and we often use this verse to warn about bitterness coming in. It's just so easy for it to come. But that's not going to be my focus today, but it is part of this verse. Verse 15 of chapter 12 of Hebrews. Looking diligently, lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled. I want to focus on the looking diligently. Yesterday we talked about running the race to obtain the prize, to be all in, to serve the Lord. And that keeps us from letting ourselves wander into all of the different areas of potential discouragement or fear that we could face in this world. Here we have a different angle on somewhat the same thought. This idea of looking diligently is the idea of focusing in an extreme manner because of the importance of the situation on what is going on to make sure that it's operating properly. I always use the illustration of a nurse who's in an intensive care unit of the highest level. There's one per room or sometimes two per room. All kind of equipment is going on, and they have to be observing all of those gauges, everything that's going on. They've got to be checking, because if they don't, just a matter of a few minutes, that patient could be gone because of their neglect. That's the idea of looking diligently. And for us as believers, we need to be focused on running the race for Christ to accomplish His will, and at the same time to be looking diligently as to our own life, as to whether or not, and here's the key, we are depending upon ourselves or we are depending upon the grace of God. We got to look diligently lest we fail of the grace of God. You know, it's exciting. Every moment of your life, every moment of my life, we have all the grace we need for victory, for wisdom, for direction, for encouragement, everything that we need. Because of what Christ did on the cross, the free gift of His involvement in our lives is right there if we walk by faith. And yet we drift into self-dependence. We drift into our own thinking. We lose that cutting edge of believing God. And then we begin to have problems. And that's where bitterness comes from. Instead of taking responsibility for not having trusted the Lord and receiving His grace, we look at what the situation was or what a person did, and we can begin to shift blame. That's what bitterness is all about. But the main point I want to get across here is if we're constantly wanting to do God's will, as 1 Corinthians 9 says, and we are focused on that, not all the other things that could distract us, and we are looking diligently, we're constantly monitoring, just looking at the monitors in our life of, are we really filled with the Spirit? Are we depending on the Lord? If we are sensitive to that on a moment-by-moment basis, then we'll have the grace of God and we'll be able to accomplish the work that God has. And believe me, the encouragement that'll be there and the wisdom that God will give will help you counteract any of the fears and problems that are around. So looking diligently. How much do you really think about your spiritual life through the day? How much of the time do you just drift? Then you sort of wake up and you need God. No, there ought to be that walk with God, that simple communion with Him, that simple dependence in every decision you make, everything that you do. That's abiding in Christ. That is simply resting in who you already are and believing that God will lead you if you're trusting Him. So let's look diligently. And if we look diligently at walking in the grace of God, believe me, you'll stay encouraged.